So a while back, my friend Kamui Miracle decided to put a gun to the back of my head and force me to read the Beastars manga. And so, like a good little boy, I did just that. I read the entirety of the Beastars manga, and I think it's okay, if not really disappointing. I saw the potential of the world and the characters, but ultimately left the series feeling like it could have been so much more. Now, I planned to make this rant after the final chapter came out, but I got busy and put off writing this. So now is the time to begin. Now is the time to put all my thoughts on Beastars in an orderly fashion. So let's start with the source of what seems to be a lot of the negatives, and that is the last arc and ending of Beastars, Revenge of the Love Failure. This arc single-handedly ruined all the goodwill that the series built up with me. There are a bunch of errors with the arc as a whole, and the ending was so rushed and yet felt like a waste of time at the same time. So I'm going to dissect the arc and pick out what's wrong. Oh yeah, and spoilers for those who care. So, to start, for those who don't know what Beastars is, first of all, this really isn't the video for you, but in any case, it was a manga started in 2016. The author is one Paru Itagaki, a 27-year-old female furry who wears a chicken mask. Its protagonist is Legosi, a kind but shy gray wolf with a fetish for bunny girls. God, this series is weird. The context of the arc we will be talking about here is that Legosi was expelled from school for committing an act of predation. Because of this, he has a license that restricts him from marrying herbivores. This is a problem because he's in love with a bunny girl named Haru, and now he can't be with her. As for other characters, we have Louis, who leads a pack of lions until he bails because one of his two father figures were killed. There's also Yafia, a horseman that takes down predators and has taken an interest in Legosi. Then there's Gosha, who should really be more important to this arc than he is, but we'll get to that later. As for other characters, none of them are important to this arc, like, at all. So with that out of the way, let's get into the arc itself. The arc opens pretty simply with the introduction of our main villain. His name is Melon, and, well, we'll get to his character later. Yafia is hunting him down because he found dead elephants that somehow kept showing up in his apartment. Just coincidence, I'm sure. Turns out Melon is a hybrid, a cross between a leopard and a gazelle, which is an interesting concept. Hybrids provide a nice piece of world building that can be used for an interesting piece of conflict for multiple established characters. This gets explored when Yafia employs Legosi to help him catch a crazy serial killer, that crazy serial killer being Melon. He gets Legosi to help him by saying that if they catch Melon, he will scratch the predatory incident from Legosi's record, allowing Legosi to finally get with his bunny waifu. The two go to a club of degeneracy to find Melon, and they do, catching him pretty easily. Alright, so roll credits, right? Well, not exactly. Yafia leaves the impressionable teen alone with a psychopathic murderer who's incredibly manipulative so that they can have a little chat. This leads to a genuinely engaging conversation as Legosi begins to see parts of his future in Melon, what could be his future child. This leads to Melon manipulating Legosi into letting him go, which leads to Melon shooting him in the chest. It's a genuinely good scene fueled by the characters and their personalities, and the whole concept of the hybrid really works well for this scene. As Legosi is confronted with the conflict that Melon could very well be his future child, and feels a need to comfort and protect him because of that, while Melon uses these emotions to manipulate Legosi into letting him go. Now, time for some dumb shit. So, Louis is having himself a stroll down by the back alley market and just so happens to run to the Shishigumi. Now, this is already a convenient situation, but it gets more convenient when Free attempts to kill Louis like he promised. When Louis left the Shishigumi, they promised that they would eat him if he ever returned to the back alley market. And in that time, Louis' antlers fall off. This leads to Free making the claim that he never seen this deer before and welcomes Louis once more. Now, after they bring Louis back to the Shishigumi headquarters, it is revealed that Melon took control of the Shishigumi. This is confusing to start. How did Melon take control of the Shishigumi? Did he waltz in there and make himself leader? How can he just do that? I know he seems scary, but this is a gang of lions. Louis only took leadership because they wanted him to. Seems weird that Melon can just do that. My other question is why? Why would Melon do something like this? What reason does he have to take control of the Shishigumi? However, we can talk more about Melon later. For now, we should move on to the next scene, where Legoshi wakes up in his hospital bed, but he actually doesn't. Legoshi is having an out-of-body experience, something that has never been established or even foreshadowed at, and will never come up again. This won't be the first or worst time something like this happens. The issue with this scene is that it puts the scene before the story. It pulls some random idea so that they can facilitate the scene where Legoshi is able to speak to his mother. Oh yeah, Legoshi's dead mother is here. And no, it's not a memory, because that's information that Legoshi would never know. None of that Rise of Skywalker shit. So anyway, the Force Ghost of Leano tells Legoshi why she committed suicide when Legoshi was only 9 years old. Now, something about this backstory bothered me, but I couldn't exactly put my finger on it for the longest time. But now I think I finally get it. Leano, to put it simply, is one of the most self-centered and piece of garbage characters that get off scot-free. She isolates herself from her family because of her looks in spite of knowing that they would love her regardless, and she only cares about the superficial aspects to the point where she kills herself for not having those aspects. She makes sure Legoshi looks like a pure-blooded wolf before killing herself too. And what kind of reprimanding does she get from Legoshi? The years of loneliness she left him with? The grief she caused him and her father from her purely selfish act? Absolutely none. The best part is that she calls herself a winner because she had Legoshi. Leano, to put it in simple terms, is only his mother in terms of blood. She did not care for him, she did not protect him, all she did was give birth to him. She seems to feel no remorse for what she did to Gosha. The poor guy had to lose his wife and daughter, and she didn't even spare a thought for him. The kicker is that we are supposed to feel bad for her. I feel bad for Legoshi and Gosha, who had to deal with her bullshit before I feel bad for her. And, well, it's just not great. But with that out of the way, let's get to a scene I do like. Gosha and Yafia on the bridge. This scene works as it is completely reasonable and in character for Gosha to feel worried for his only remaining family member, and feel anger towards Yafia, who directly put him in danger. Good scene. Now, before we get any further, we should talk about the Juno and Louis romance. To sum it up in a few words, it's forced, stupid, and comes out of absolutely nowhere. It's so pointless that I won't even discuss it for the rest of the video. The whole plot is that Louis has a fetish and can't get it up to normal girls. That's it. So let's just skim over the next few scenes. Legoshi and Yafia renews their subscription for another year. Gosha becomes an oppressed gamer for finally getting his anime waifu. Legoshi tries to find out about Melon from its tattoo artist, only to feed him stupid nonsense that is way more interesting than what we got. Melon finds out that Legoshi is killing him and decides to make him sleep with the fishes. Luckily, the fish are cool with Legoshi because he has a black friend. Wow, bridging the gap seems really important to the sea animals, while the land animals don't seem to care that much. Wonder if that will get explored. Nope. So Legoshi joins forces with the Shishigumi to take down Melon, but they need more info on Melon, so they go to a man who shits in people's coffees that just so happens to be a Grand Wizard. Wow, this pure blood supremacy group is interesting. I wonder if we can explore. Nope. Anyways, so Melon is teaching at Haru's college for whatever reason. So Haru spends the night with Legoshi and pulls an epic prank on him. Legoshi then hunts down Melon and has a chase scene with him. The police get the wrong idea and think Legoshi hungers for another. Little do they know that Louis is the only animal that can satisfy his taste. In order to escape the police, Legoshi goes back to his old school and meets up with his old friends and roommates. They gladly hide Lugosi as Lugosi learns what's been up with his old school. Turns out they went full segregation and separated the herbivores and carnivores completely. Not to mention that Lugosi notices something wrong with his old friend Jack. Jack and Lugosi talk about their past and their history of friends, and it's an alright scene overall. It adds some much needed depth to Jack, who has been pretty surface level before. The only major issue is when Jack reveals that he is in a special secret class that is filled only with the smartest dogs. Now, at this point in the next few scenes, Jack decides to drop a few bombshells that, well, make absolutely no sense, and are never explored further. First, Jack attempts suicide by onion because he is burdened with too much knowledge. After that, they have a nice talk about history in the lunchroom. First, they talk about the original carnivores called life animals and the original herbivores called nature animals. And then they became friends surprisingly quick and decided to start a society together. And further down the line, there was a great war between the carnivores and herbivores. It was said that there were all these smaller conflicts between these two, but none of this size before. Now here's my first question. How'd this war come to be? Wars of those kind of size just don't happen. Have to be some kind of trigger. For example, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the trigger for World War I. My second question comes when Jack mentions the end of the war. He states that the war was ended by the arrival of a giant fucking whale. The greatest war known to animal kind was ended by a whale. How? How does a whale just appear and end the war? What did the whale do? Was its fat body just so big that everyone threw down their arms? This whole situation requires a lot more context to be considered reasonable, since right now the whole backstory to one of the most significant events in this world seems to be nothing more than a joke. Also, the whale is still kicking around in knows Yafia. Wait, so what the actual fuck is happening? Yafia and the whale talk about the past without explaining anything. I think this is the best time to discuss world building. Now, world building is extremely important. Without the world, there is no story, so it's up to the writer to develop a world in which a story can happen. Now, world building can be as simple as establishing a place in which the plot takes place, or it can be as extreme as developing a full culture and language for a race. It is very important to carefully construct your world so that not only does it function, it also feels lived in and not just a set piece for the story. Let's take an example of a really well-built world, One Piece. The way One Piece succeeds in its world building is by creating unique places with actual histories, cultures, and political structures, as well as maps and other details. This gives the audience everything they need to know, and then some, allowing the audience to fully understand the reasoning behind the events happening. Let's take the supernovas, for example. The supernovas are fellow pirates who went on their own journey around the same time as Luffy and his crew and managed to acquire quite a high bounty. Now, this piece of world building allows the world to feel much larger, as it makes sense that the others would also be going on their own adventure and acquiring their own bounties. However, Beastars had always remained quite reserved, doing little world building past what was necessary. Which is fine up until this whale shit. What doesn't work about this piece of world building is that it lacks any information on the details. This shrouds the situation in a mystery, but also makes it confusing on how it could happen. So at this point, for this to be fixed, it simply requires an explanation that we never got and we're never going to get. So what's left is confusion. Why did this happen? With the whole point of world building being an explanation to the questions surrounding the story, this simply feels like it harms the story more than it helps it. So in the end, the solution is simple. Either fix it or remove it. Either way, Beastars would be better than it is now. After that, we get into a chapter I like, where Bill cares for a chicken fetus. It's pleasant and shows growth for Bill, while showing an interaction between characters we don't get to see too often. Next is another fairly emotional scene, where Ozma, Louie's adopted father, dies. It has a fine enough impact and works well. The hug is nice and the calculator stuff was sweet, but it's pretty funny that they let him fuck around with a calculator while in critical condition. The next major thing that happened is when Louie and Haru meet again, they talk about Lugosi and how she changed the view of her life since she found Lugosi, but then goes on to say she made a promise to let herself get fucking eaten. Haru quite literally told Louie how she treats her life more delicately because she loves Lugosi, only to go and throw it away in a month. Are you fucking serious? How can a character act in such a contradictory way in only a single chapter? What reason do you have to do something like that? And the best part is, the person she promised to let eat her is none other than Melon. So to put it simply, Haru from this point onwards is a fucking damsel in distress who will die if Lugosi doesn't win. Did the writer just have nothing for Haru to do, so they put her in a situation where she's in danger to raise the stakes? Also, why the fuck does Melon even have a teaching degree? How can you mess up a character to the degree of having them agree to throw away their life while fucking saying how they have self-worth now? Jesus, alright. Let's just move on. So Lugosi participates in a death quiz so he can come to the turf war. Why though? Why wouldn't he just show up? Who's gonna stop him? The gangs he has to fight anyway? Whatever. So Lugosi, in spite of almost winning the quiz, is almost skewered anyway. And is saved by Melon. We'll talk about Melon later. Now we have to talk about Q. Q is awful and a mistake. She was introduced earlier as one of the 3 animals who hung out with Louie involuntarily in a facility meant to breed animals for food. Louie got out when Okuma adopted him, while Q was rescued by Goheen. She then trained while having the hots for Goheen and sexually assaulted Lugosi. But the worst thing she does is introduce chimeras. For those who don't know, chimeras are basically stands for JoJo, in which you summon an illusionary form of yourself to fight your enemies. To sum up what I think about chimeras, they do not fit the world of Beastars at all. The world of Beastars was built as relatively grounded, with a distinct lack of supernatural elements, so with the sudden introduction of something like chimeras and then dropping it right after just really doesn't work. In fact, the best thing to do with Q in general is to simply write her out of the story, since there is no need for her, since Lugosi could simply train under Yafia or even Goheen. Wow, imagine Goheen doing things. So, in conclusion, Q was a mistake. Now moving on, we have the turf war, where it tries to make us think Louie died. Good job. Alright, I guess now is the time to talk about the next issue with this arc, or rather the series as a whole. The distinct lack of death. For a series that opened with a herbivore being eaten, Beastars has chosen to do more fake-out deaths than actual deaths. Which is fine, but the large, ever-increasing number of fake-out deaths make it mildly frustrating when there are some characters who really should die. For example, Melon gets shot in the chest twice, which is supposed to be enough to kill a hybrid. However, instead of dying, Melon bites into Yafia's neck, which would presumably kill both of them, as Yafia is taking Melon to get treated for his wounds. But turns out, no. Neither of them die, and they both end up fine. This fake-out death is much more frustrating than all the others, as it makes complete sense for one or both characters to die. Logistically, it makes sense, and character-wise, it makes sense. However, neither of them die. This is pretty lazy, as in it's backing out on consequences for the character's actions. Why have to write the emotional reaction of a character as after seeing someone die when they just don't die? So what comes next after that is all the gangs light torches fueled by their own blood. Anyway, Lugosi shows up with his own torch featuring the blood of both him and his boyfriend Louie. At the same time, Louie appears at a press conference showing that he didn't actually die. Who's surprised? So now we finally reach the climax of the entire arc. Legoshi has to get through several other gangs on his way to reach Melon. At the same time, Gosha and Yafia meet so that they can both simultaneously do nothing. So the first fight is with the Dokugumi, which is the Komodo Dragon Gang. The way this fight starts is with Legoshi being immune to the venom thanks to his bloodline, and his teeth suddenly growing back because of the regenerative capabilities in his blood, I think? Well then, I guess the consequences of actions do not matter anymore. Remember when he first removed his teeth? That was a meaningful action of defiance against the thought that he was just going to eat people he cared about? How it had an effect on Yafia? Yeah, all that was just wasted as he got his teeth back with no issue. So, who cares anymore? It means diddly squat now. Now he can just do whatever he wants without any consequences. Good to know. In any case, the rest of the fight is pretty normal, with Legoshi ending the fight with a meaningful action after tanking several explosions with minimal injury. The next fight is with the Inari Gumi. There's really not much to comment on with this fight, as the only noteworthy feature of the fight is the fact that Legoshi puts on a dress, which is okay. I mean, it's a JoJo's reference, so... Anyway, after that, we get to the final battle between Melon and Legoshi, and, well, the fight itself is nothing special, but what happens around the fight is certainly something else. Firstly, during the press conference, Louis decides to expose the back alley market to everyone. I'm sure this will have massive repercussions and implications going forward. No? It's only going to cause a minor conflict that gets resolved by everyone holding hands? Great, this is just perfect. When any character commits to an action, that action must have consequences. Whether they be negative or positive is up to the writer, but they must happen. However, in this case, the consequences of what should be a momentous action are surprisingly small. I mean, they destroy the back alley market and everything is hunky-dory. Quite strange, isn't it? What if you found out that there was a place where your neighbor could go eat other people? Would you feel outraged, threatened, maybe even spiteful towards the people who did this to what were potential friends and family? I mean, the meat has to come from somewhere. There are obviously plenty of herbivores who have suspicions of their carnivore comrades. So to say that the conflict is resolved the same night it started? I just don't buy it. What has been shown already in this story is that there is a level of caution and suspicion of carnivores. So the confirmation of that suspicion that carnivores are not only eating herbivores regularly, but having a whole market for it, should be more than disturbing to herbivore communities. Yet the conflict is just resolved when the market gets destroyed and they hold hands? Then Louis, the character who caused an event which should be the source of a conflict for a whole nother arc, is given no consequences whatsoever. This is an odd scenario, since earlier in the story, with life as a high school dropout, the author showed that they can give proper consequences for actions. However, now, the consequences given don't seem to match up the scale of the events happening. In short, it is an unnecessarily quick resolution to what should be the conflict of a whole nother arc. Moving forward, the next major event to happen while Legoshi and Melon are fighting is Gosha encountering Melon's dad, who did not seem to appreciate the relationship he had. This then moves us to the Gosha backstory, which is where to begin. This backstory is pretty alright, actually. I did not feel a damn thing for Toki, but I certainly felt bad for Gosha, who had to be left alone from the selfish decision with his wife. This does inform why Gosha is even more careful about his venom now than before, as well as reinforce his attachment to Legoshi as the only family member that didn't leave him. So in all honesty, I don't think the backstory is all that bad. It also justifies Gosha's anger at the father for simply throwing away something that Gosha cherished till he lost. So overall, the sequence of events is perfectly fine. Now moving on, what we have next in store is the ending of the entire series, in which there is quite a lot to talk about. So, to start, Melon chooses to commit suicide. But from shooting himself in the chest twice. It's a pretty odd and inefficient way of doing something like that, especially considering that you have a gun and this leads to him not dying. So what was the point of that? No, seriously, why did that scene happen at all? Was it so Yafia could carry him and then get bitten, but that also leads to nothing? Like, Melon shoots himself so he can die, then Yafia tries to bring him to the hospital, but Melon tries biting him to kill him, and then neither of them die. So what's the point of any of that? Was that supposed to lead something? Or was that supposed to be another fake out death that tricked us into worrying for these characters? Oh, I know I would have cried when Melon died. Who knows? But in any case, we get easily one of the worst endings for a series I have seen in a while. So what happens? Well, nothing happens. No plots are resolved, nothing is tied up, nothing is resolved, and the only thing that changed is Melon and the Shishigumi are now in jail. The ending doesn't feel like an ending, since most of the conflicts don't end. Legoshi is still struggling with his complicated relationship with Haru. Louis tries to get with Juno, but nothing happens there. The whale, who still hasn't had an explanation behind it, offers to help the society by providing fish as a sort of meat. But Yafia refuses, because he doesn't want to become reliant on fish society. Okay, so nothing comes from that. Some fish weirdo moves out Legoshi's apartment building, but suddenly doesn't. Legoshi and Haru almost get married, but then don't. So what is the point of this? Why did nothing get resolved? What about the whole aspect of the back alley market that got revealed? Is there nothing to worry about there? What about everyone from school? We get one panel, and is that supposed to be the resolution? This ending is easily one of the most rushed endings I've ever seen. The resolutions are provided in panels. The character arcs are completed off screen. When I say the ending does not feel like an ending, this is what I mean. The conflicts don't feel resolved, because we aren't shown them being resolved. We are simply told that things happened. Therefore, it does not feel like things ended. It does not feel like things are resolved, because they shouldn't be. If they took their time, maybe even had another volume for the ending, then maybe the writer would have been able to string something together. But you can't just end your story like this. It's the equivalent of reaching the point where a war could break out, and then they say they all lived happily ever after. This is simply so rushed that I don't even know what to say anymore. The ending lacks a satisfying resolution to almost every single plot line that was set up previously. So to sum it up, the ending would be better if they took more time to carefully resolve everything. Even then, it would feel bloated by the sheer amount of explanation necessary to tie everything together. In reality, Beastars could have used another arc with all the setup it used. Remember when Jack mentioned the rise of a dog-led dictatorship? Wouldn't it be nice to explore that, or the history of this world, or anything revealed during the whole Jack section? Seriously though, they could cut Jack out of the story and it would be better off, and that is incredibly sad. In the end, everything Beastars built up to was nothing but a wet fart of a conclusion. Now, if you thought we were done, then you are dead wrong. We still have to talk about the characters in this arc. The first character we should discuss is Melon. Melon, as a character, begs a lot of questions. Like, what are his goals? What's his motivation? The most we get is the fact that he is insane, which is explained in his backstory. However, this doesn't really inform any of his actions. In all honesty, it is perhaps one of the laziest ways to write a character. Making a character insane does not replace a motivation. It should, at the bare minimum, give context to the motive. Let's take the example of Jack the Ripper from The Record of Ragnarok. His backstory is quite similar to Melon's, but what motivates him is the desire to see the fear of people as they die. It's a motivation fueled by his insanity, however it is still a solid motivation for his character. It is a goal to strive for. It is an insane goal because who would want it besides an insane person, but it is still a goal. Melon has no motivations, no goals. He is a character without a goal, a character without aim, without a reason to do a thing he does outside of his insanity factor. Ultimately, Melon only does what the plot needs him to do at any convenient moment. As a character, he's a terribly lazy piece of writing, as without motivation or goals to strive for, everything Melon does is for no reason, because there is no reason for him to do anything outside of what is needed for the plot. Why does he take over the Shishigumi? Why did he get a teacher's degree? Why did he make the deal with Haru? Ultimately, at best, the answer is I don't know. And at worst, the answer is for the plot to happen. If one character deserved more than what they got this arc, it would be Gohin. But besides Gohin, it would be Gosha. Gosha's use in this arc is disappointing to say the least. Not the most disappointing, but certainly not good. His involvement in this arc is surprisingly small, when out of all the characters, he should have the most investment in what is happening. But in spite of this, we don't get nearly enough Gosha. Gosha's input in this arc is a few good scenes, and that's about it. Plot-wise, he does nothing of use at all. It feels weird for the character who should be more important to this arc than most side characters is pushed to a small role. Hell, Jack had more input on the plot than him, and in the end, Gosha's input on the plot was negligible, and his use was so small that you could generally cut him from the story, and it would mostly be the same. Which is really bad in my eyes, as Gosha was always my favorite character, and to see him get this treatment, well, it's just sad. In the case of Haru, you could easily call her the winner of the biggest disappointment in this arc. She does nothing except function as another ticking clock for Legoshi to race against. The use of Haru is quite odd considering the contradictory actions in order to shoehorn her into the plot that she really did not need to be a part of. Overall, it's just a waste of a character and a waste of time. As for Louis, he had fine use during this arc. He had a mix of good scenes and bad scenes. Though it is a little odd that he would just be fine with the arranged marriage that he originally didn't want. He's just okay with it, I guess. Moving on to Yafia, he was also mostly fine, except for some convenient bits of incompetence in the story, not very in character for Yafia. In terms of other characters, they're either just fine or aren't important enough to talk about. Then there's Legoshi, who has some of the worst plot armor I've seen this arc. In this arc, he's gotten so many scenarios of complete luck that it's unnatural. In terms of character, there is really nothing special to say about it. The conflict is alright, and his decisions make enough sense. However, the weird thing is his willingness to go along with everything the plot needs him to do. And in any case, the characters and their arcs in this arc are disappointing overall. They make decisions that make no sense and are even harmful to what they want. The character work, which functioned as the core of the first few Beastars arc, has now been replaced with characters that only live to serve the plot. In conclusion, the last arc of Beastars is nothing short of a complete disappointment. It has major issues with the world building and the plot as well as the characters, and is overall not a great story. However, what amplifies it is the fact that this is the end of Beastars. This is it. This wet fart is our ending. However, as I read through this arc and this ending, something stuck out to me, which is that most of the issues are symptomatic of a writer who has stopped caring. Haru has stopped caring about Beastars. The laziness in the writing, the rushed ending, the quick and easy resolution of what should be massive conflicts. It is all showing, at least to me, that the writer has stopped caring about the story she is making and more or less just wants to make it to the finish, thus leading to a complete mess of an ending. The best way to fix it, in my opinion, is to add another arc where a lot of the conflict and setup is fully explored and thus end it more decently. However, in its current state, the final arc and ending of Beastars is awful and a complete downgrade from what it used to be. The writer showed that they could write a story, however when it came to an ending, we got a lazy, rushed mess from someone who stopped caring. Hello there, and welcome to the end of the video. thanks for making it this far, I guess. And thank you for watching. This took quite a bit some time, so I appreciate you watching it all the way through to the end. Now, if you enjoyed this video, well, good for you, because I have more things planned in the future. So keep an eye on this channel for a bit, okay? See you later.